he's had a lot of tests. His physiologist is a guy by the name of Barry Fudge. Great name. And Barry's currently based at Loughborough. They've got a high-performance EIS centre, English Institute Sports Centre there. But he's also based down at St Mary's at Twickenham, where they've got an EIS centre. And he's had a lot of tests, which means, you know, for the best one in the world, they're not going to test him unless they've got a decent test criteria. So what do we mean by that? Well, it has to be specific. So the test that you are picking has to meet the associated demands of the sport. All right, so let's give an example. If I want to test VO2 max in a cyclist, how would I do it? Right, there you go. Specificity, you would do it on a cycle ergometer. If I want to test VO2 max of a runner, I'd do it on a treadmill. A rower, row machine. Okay, what if I want to test VO2 max of a swimmer? How would you test VO2 max of a swimmer? Okay, so it could be a row machine, but is it specific? No, we're kind of fudging it, but I get why you say row machine, because you're thinking outside of the pool and so on. The simple answer is, shove them in the pool. Okay, in the dim and distant past, we genuinely used to have Douglas bags on tracks and walk down the track with the Douglas bags and then have it attached into a secure light snorkel tube, take expired air. The best way to do it is to use a flume tank. So a flume tank is where they swim against a wall of water, and you again use a snorkel-like device, you collect expired air. So you can collect oxygen consumption while somebody's swimming. It gets complicated with sports like triathlon, because a triathlete might say, I want to assess my lactate data. Okay, good. How do you want to do it? Well, I'm going to do it for running. Good, okay. And then what I want to do is take that data and relate it to cycling. No, you can't. Because quite clearly, if you compare running to cycling, physiologically, biomechanically, they're completely different. So what happens during the treadmill test will not relate once to the bike test, which will not happen relate to the swim test. So you have to be specific in the mode and the nature of the test that you're going to use. It has to assess the demands of the event. This semester, that's quite easy. Okay, it's not particularly complicated. Next semester it gets complicated when we start to talk about how we assess strength and power, because there are different modes, from cycles to treadmills to jumping tests to force-orientated tests and so on, and then which ones are more suitable for which athletes and which sports. So it gets much, much more complicated. So what you need to think about in terms of specificity is physiology behind it, biomechanical constraints, the well-being of your athlete, and then maybe this idea of being interdisciplinary. Think about it very, very simply. Let's take psychology. An athlete is going to be much, much more stressed if they're a swimmer and you bring them in and say, I want to put you on a rowing ergometer to assess VO2 max. They don't row. So they're less likely to now give you a maximal effort. They're more likely to terminate the test early, which means that we get an inappropriate score, and by definition, we don't find out what their VO2 is. Physiologically, let's use the swimmer-rower example. The physiological demands of rowing are very different to the physiological demands of swimming. Rowing has got quite a large rest period in it. As much as rowers would disagree, it has. Once you've hit the catch, so you get the full extension and drive off the legs, you've got a catch, and then you've got a down phase, which is actually a recovery phase. 2/3 of the stroke is work, 1/3 of the stroke is rest. Swimming has no rest phase. So the energetics of swimming are far, far greater than the energetics of rowing, which means the mechanics are very different between the two. Same if you compare running to cycling. So as a result, we have to be specific in the test that we pick, both for the athlete and for the sport. It gets more complicated if you take an athlete that's got a disability. Okay, so for example, you want to assess, I don't know, cardiovascular responses in a wheelchair athlete. Okay? So they're a wheelchair athlete, let's say they're a basketball player. It gets more complicated because the physiology of somebody that's, let's say, got cerebral palsy is very different to somebody who's able-bodied. Their physiological response to exercise is different. So you couldn't use a standard, what we call graded exercise test. It has to be of a different form. You then have to make the decision. Are you going to put the wheelchair, for example, on the treadmill? Okay? Our treadmill's big enough to do it, but a lot of treadmills you would never risk it. So do you do it outdoors? If you do it outdoors, then as you're about to see, that affects the reliability of your data. So be very, very careful at the first level as to the nature of the test that you're going to pick. Does that kind of make sense? Sounds very logical, but I'm going to give you an example in a moment of people at the highest level doing it wrong. In fact, no, I'll give you an example now. When I was working, I sound like Uncle Arthur, don't I, from Only Fools and Horses. When I was working for UK Athletics, one of the things that they provided with a template. These are the tests that we use because we're saying that these are the uniform tests across all centres. In other words, we can compare across centres. Brilliant. So I've got this book, and I went through it, and the VO2 stuff was absolutely fine. Then I thought, I'll have a look at 400 metre running. So 400 metre running. So if it's running, I would expect to do a running test. No, the first test they have is a Wingate cycle test to assess anaerobic power. Well, anaerobic power is important. Why the fuck would you put a 400 metre runner running on a cycle ergometer? Why would you not just put them on a non-motorised treadmill and get them to do it that way? Why do you not get them to do some other different kind of power test? The bike is the worst thing in the world to put them on. Mechanically different, physiologically different, psychologically different. Okay, so the mistakes are made at the highest level. Avoid making mistakes.